I still remember the way the silverware clinked against the plates that night, the sound sharper than it had any right to be. My son's voice carried over the hum of conversation, casual, careless, as though he were asking me to pass the salt. "Just host Thanksgiving, Mom," Greg said, waving his hand like it was nothing. "It's only 20 people." Only 20. The words rattled around inside me like coins dropped into an empty jar. I smiled. Of course I did. I've spent 72 years perfecting that smile, the one that says, "Of course, dear," even when inside I feel invisible. But this time, my smile meant something else entirely, because I had already made my decision. Before I dive into this story, let me introduce myself. My name is Ruthanne Pierce, and I'm 72 years old. I've lived a long, full life. One of raising children, scrubbing floors, balancing checkbooks, and putting everyone else's needs ahead of my own. And now, for the first time in my life, I'm learning what it feels like to choose me. But before we go further, I'd love to know something about you. Where are you watching from? I know these stories travel far, across towns, states, even oceans. Sometimes I like to imagine someone sitting in their kitchen in Texas, or sipping tea in London, or wrapped in a blanket in a small apartment in New York City. So tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? Now, let me take you back. For decades, Thanksgiving was my domain. I roasted turkeys the size of toddlers, whipped mashed potatoes until my arms ached, and baked pies by the dozen. Apple, pumpkin, pecan, all from scratch. My kitchen would be chaos for days. Flour dusting the counters, butter softening in bowls, the smell of cinnamon clinging to my apron. And every year my family walked in, sat down, and ate like kings. They'd compliment the food, of course, and maybe pat my shoulder. But by the end of the night, I was left with mountains of dishes and a sore back. And not once in all those years, did Greg or Monica, his wife, offer to take a turn hosting. I told myself it was fine. That's what mothers do. We give, we serve, we keep traditions alive. But time has a way of changing things. My knees aren't what they used to be. My hands, once quick with a rolling pin, now stiffen if I work too long. And the truth is, the joy that once filled me during those holidays had thinned into something else, something closer to weariness, even resentment. Last year, I nearly collapsed carrying the turkey from the oven to the table. I laughed it off, joked that the bird weighed more than I did, but when I sat down, I noticed Greg didn't even look up from his phone. Monica fussed with the centerpiece, making sure the flowers hid the stain on the tablecloth. My grandchildren whispered about who was getting the last slice of pie. No one noticed me clutching my chest, trying to catch my breath. And yet, when Greg said, "Just host Thanksgiving. It's only 20 people," he said it as though it were nothing, as though I hadn't spent half my life keeping this family's traditions alive. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in my kitchen. The counters were bare, the sink was empty, but I felt heavier than I ever had before. My life had become a carousel of service, spinning in circles, never stopping, never stepping off. And I realized something. If I didn't stop it myself, no one else ever would. So I made a decision. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. A click of the mouse, a confirmation email, a holiday cruise leaving from Miami, 7 days of ocean air, buffets I wouldn't have to cook, and sunsets I wouldn't have to share with anyone but myself. I printed the ticket and slipped it into my dresser drawer. Every time I walked past, I felt its weight. For the first time in years, I wasn't dreading the holidays. I was planning my escape. And I didn't tell a soul. Looking back now, I think the smile I gave Greg when he said those words was the most honest smile I've worn in years. He thought it meant yes, of course. But really, it meant just wait and see, because that year, Thanksgiving was going to be different, and not just because of the cruise. No, I had something much bigger planned, something that would change everything. Greg's words didn't come as a question, not even as a suggestion. They landed on the table like a fact, the kind that didn't need discussion. "Just host Thanksgiving, Mom." "It's only 20 people," he said it between bites of pasta one evening, his fork scraping against his plate. He didn't even look at me. His eyes were glued to the television in the corner, some sports game blaring. It wasn't the number that stung. I'd cooked for 40 before, sometimes 50 when cousins brought friends. 20 was practically a picnic compared to the years I'd managed an army of relatives. But it was the just. That single word carried the weight of every time I'd been overlooked, dismissed, expected to perform like some kitchen magician who never tired, never complained, never wanted for herself. "Only 20, he'd said, like I hadn't spent days on aching feet, like I hadn't stayed up until midnight polishing silverware that no one but me noticed. Like my bones weren't 72 years old, and like my heart hadn't grown heavy with the quiet knowledge that I was seen less as a person, more as a convenience." I smiled at him, because that's what mothers do. But inside, my thoughts spun. Over the next few weeks, his words echoed in the smallest places. In the grocery store, when I passed a mountain of canned cranberries. In the bakery aisle, staring at pie crusts I used to roll by hand. At night, lying awake, my knees throbbing, I could almost hear him again. "Just host, Mom. It's only 20 people." Monica, my daughter-in-law, didn't help matters. She called a few days later, her voice sugary sweet in the way it gets when she's asking for something. "Ruthanne," she began, drawing out my name like honey. "Since you'll be hosting, could you make sure to do the sweet potato casserole with marshmallows?" "The kids won't eat it any other way," I murmured a polite, "Of course," even though my chest tightened. I could practically see her smug smile through the phone. That's the thing about Monica. She knows exactly how to wrap her requests in ribbons of guilt. She's perfected it. By the end of the week, I had 3 messages from nieces and nephews asking for their favorite desserts, and one from my grandson reminding me he hated green beans but loved stuffing. Not a single one of them offered to bring a dish, not even a pie from the store. They all assumed I would do it because I always had, and maybe once upon a time I would have. But this year was different, because tucked away in my dresser drawer was a folded piece of paper, my ticket out. I'd always dreamed of taking a cruise. I'd watch the commercials sometimes, couples holding hands on decks, families laughing by the pool, an older woman with her hair pulled back, watching the sunset with a glass of wine. I used to think, that could be me, but then the guilt would creep in. Who would cook for everyone? Who would set the table? Who would keep the tradition alive? This year, the guilt didn't win. I'd booked a holiday cruise, 7 nights of freedom, leaving the very week my family assumed I'd be chained to a stove. I hadn't told a soul, and that secret burned deliciously inside me. Every time Monica sent another reminder, I'd smile and nod, then slip into my room and open the drawer just to look at that ticket. The cruise line logo gleamed at the top. Passenger, Ruthanne Pierce. My name, all mine. For once, my future was about me. As Thanksgiving drew closer, the demands increased. Greg called one evening, his tone edged with impatience. "Mom, don't forget to set up the folding tables. 20 people won't fit at the main one." I wanted to laugh. Folding tables, heavy as stone, had been my nemesis for years. I'd wrestled them up from the basement, pinched my fingers more times than I cared to count. And there he was, instructing me as if I hadn't done it 100 times before. But instead of arguing, I just said, "Don't worry, Greg. I've got it all under control," because I did, just not the way he thought. At night, I'd imagine their faces when they realized the truth. Greg, his fork paused mid-air. Monica, her carefully applied lipstick faltering around a tight smile. My grandkids, wide-eyed, whispering behind their hands. I knew they'd be shocked, maybe even angry, but I couldn't stop myself from smiling in the dark. For the first time in decades, I was planning something for me. And it wasn't just about the cruise. That was only part of it. Deep down, I knew there was something else I had to do, something that would shatter their assumptions and remind them that I wasn't just their workhorse. I was their mother, their grandmother, a woman with her own life. And this year, I was going to prove it. The decision itself took less than 10 minutes. 10 minutes to change the shape of my entire holiday, maybe even the rest of my life. I'd been sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, the steam curling up in front of my face. The house was quiet. Too quiet, really. That hollow kind of silence you only notice when you realize how much noise you used to carry inside you. Kids' laughter, clattering dishes, a husband's footsteps. My late husband, Walter, had been gone for years now, and though the grief softened with time, it still had edges that cut when I least expected it. That night, I pulled out my laptop and typed into the search bar, "Holiday Cruises." The screen filled with blues and golds, shining ships, families lounging by pools, old couples strolling under fairy lights strung across decks. One ad caught my eye, 7 nights to the Caribbean. Escape the stress. Create your own holiday. Escape the stress. The words hit me like a lifeline tossed into deep water. I clicked through, scrolling past pictures of islands, turquoise waters, and white sand beaches. My finger hovered over the Book Now button, trembling slightly. A voice in my head, the old voice, the one that's lived in me since I became a wife and mother, whispered, "What about the family? What will they do without you?" But another voice, quieter and stronger, answered back, "What about you, Ruthanne? What will you do without you?" I pressed the button. 10 minutes later, I had a ticket confirmation in my inbox. I sat there for a long time staring at the email. My heart thumped like I'd done something illicit, scandalous. It felt like I'd cheated on a duty I never signed up for, but one I'd carried anyway. Then I laughed, out loud, a small, giddy sound I hadn't heard from myself in years. The paper ticket came in the mail a week later. I folded it neatly and slipped it into my dresser drawer under a stack of sweaters. But I'd check on it daily, sometimes twice, like a child sneaking peeks at hidden Christmas presents. Just knowing it was there filled me with a thrill I couldn't quite explain. I was finally doing something selfish, though selfish hardly seemed the right word. It was more like reclaiming. Of course, the guilt crept in. It always does. When my granddaughter Emma called and said, "Grandma, are you making your pecan pie this year?" "It's my favorite," I almost broke. Her little voice, sweet and expectant, twisted something inside me. I had to swallow before I answered. "We'll see, honey," I told her. Not a lie, not the truth. Just enough to keep my secret safe. Even as I folded laundry, I wondered, was I wrong? Was I abandoning them? But then I remembered all those years when no one noticed my exhaustion, when no one offered to scrub a dish or lift a chair. I remembered Greg's dismissive tone. "It's only 20 people." And the guilt gave way to resolve. I started preparing in my own quiet way, not for Thanksgiving dinner, but for my escape. I bought a new sun hat at the department store, wide-brimmed and elegant, the kind I used to think was frivolous. I tucked it into my closet with a little thrill. I ordered travel-sized toiletries, neatly packing them into a small floral bag. At night, I'd sit in my recliner with travel shows playing, imagining myself walking those same beaches, tasting exotic fruits, watching the sun dip below the horizon. I wasn't just daydreaming, I was rehearsing for freedom. Now, meanwhile, the family buzzed around me, oblivious. Monica sent group texts about who was bringing wine and which cousins needed gluten-free rolls. My nieces sent recipes they hoped I could try this year. Greg called once more to say, "Don't forget to rent the extra chairs from the church." I smiled through every call, nodding, murmuring promises. But inside, I felt like I was carrying a beautiful, sparkling secret, one that belonged only to me. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the mirror as I folded clothes or washed dishes, And for the first time in years, I saw not just a grandmother or a tired old woman, but a spark. A girl I used to know, peeking back at me, the one who had dreams beyond her kitchen walls. There was still one question pressing on me. When would I tell them? Part of me wanted to blurt it out immediately just to see the shock, but another part of me knew the timing mattered, and so I decided I'd wait until the dinner table, until every last one of them was there, forks in hand, waiting for me to play my part. That's when I'd let it slip. That's when I'd watch their faces shift, when I'd feel the weight I'd carried for years lift off my shoulders. But what they didn't know, what none of them could have guessed, was that the cruise wasn't the only secret I was keeping. No, the ticket was just the beginning. The real surprise was still to come. The closer Thanksgiving drew, the more it felt like I was living two lives. In one, I was the dependable matriarch, nodding along to requests, assuring everyone that their favorite dish would appear like magic, never hinting at the truth. In the other, I was a woman with a secret ticket, rehearsing the taste of freedom and imagining the warmth of the Caribbean sun on my face. But if there was one thing my family was consistent about, it was expecting too much. The first call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Monica's number flashed on my phone. I considered ignoring it, but guilt still tugged at me, so I picked up. "Ruthanne," she said without a hello, "I've been thinking, could you also make that cornbread stuffing? The one with the sausage? Greg loves it." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, swallowing back the instinct to snap. Greg loves it. That was always the excuse. What Greg loved, what Greg wanted, what Greg expected. "Yes, Monica," I said instead, my voice syrupy sweet. "I'll take care of it." She sighed with relief. "Perfect. I knew I could count on you as though I were a hired caterer, not the woman who had raised him, clothed him, and sacrificed years for his comfort." By Thursday, I had 3 texts from my nieces. "Aunt Ruthanne, will you be making that chocolate cream pie this year? Please say yes. Can you do the macaroni and cheese again? The baked one with the crusty top. Hey, can you skip the cranberry relish and just do canned this year?" My kids won't touch the other kind. No offers to bring their own. No, just requests, stacked one after the other, like ordering from a menu they assumed I was bound to fulfill. And each time I responded with a simple, "Of course, sweetheart." But inside, I laughed, because they were in for a surprise bigger than they could ever imagine. Even Emma, my sweet granddaughter, called one evening with a request that nearly broke my resolve. "Grandma," she whispered, as though she didn't want her mother to overhear, "could you please make those little rolls with the butter inside? The ones you used to sneak to me under the table?" Her voice was soft, trusting, and for a moment my heart ached. I wanted to promise her the world, to keep the tradition alive just for her. But then I remembered last year, how she'd sat in my lap while Monica scolded me for letting her spoil her appetite. How Greg had rolled his eyes when I struggled to get up afterward, so I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. "We'll see, darling," I told her. "We'll see." It wasn't a lie. It wasn't the truth either. But it kept me from giving away the secret. The week before Thanksgiving, Greg stopped by in person. I was folding laundry when he walked in without knocking, something he'd done since he was a teenager, as though my house were just an extension of his own. He dropped into a chair and leaned back, scrolling through his phone. "So, Mom," he said, "don't forget to polish the silverware." Monica wants everything to look nice this year. I stared at him for a moment, the audacity of it hitting me like a wave. Monica wants everything to look nice this year? As if it hadn't looked flawless every year before, as if I hadn't spent hours making sure every plate sparkled and every fork shone. Still, I forced a smile. "Of course, Greg." He nodded, satisfied, and left as quickly as he'd come. I stood there in my living room, hands, gripping the folded towel, my chest rising and falling. That was when it struck me. They didn't just expect me to host, they expected me to serve, silently, endlessly, without acknowledgement. And that's when my guilt about the cruise turned into something else, something stronger. Justification. I began noticing little things I'd ignored before. How Monica always sighed dramatically if she had to set the table. How Greg bragged to his coworkers about Mom's big Thanksgiving as if it were a family tradition he kept alive. How my nieces never thanked me with more than a passing, "You're the best" text before disappearing again until the next holiday. And suddenly, I didn't feel bad anymore. Every message, every request, every assumption only made me more certain that I was doing the right thing. The final straw came 3 days before Thanksgiving. Monica called again, her tone sharper this time. "Ruthanne, I hope you've remembered to order the turkey. Don't wait too long or you'll be stuck with the small ones." I almost laughed out loud. The turkey. For decades, I'd been roasting turkeys the size of small boulders, basted to perfection, meat so tender people licked their lips for days after. And she thought she needed to remind me? "Yes, Monica," I said, barely keeping the edge from my voice. "It's all taken care of." And it was, just not the way she thought. Because while she worried about turkeys and tablecloths, I was already packed. My suitcase sat neatly in the corner of my bedroom, tucked behind the dresser. My sun hat rested on top, a silent promise of what was to come. They had no idea that this Thanksgiving would be unlike any other. They thought they knew me. Dependable, selfless, predictable Ruthanne. But they were about to meet a different version of me, a woman who was done being taken for granted, and once the truth came out, there would be no turning back. Thanksgiving morning used to start for me at 4 a.m. I'd slip out of bed before the sun rose, tie my apron, and begin the ritual, stuffing the turkey, kneading dough, whisking gravy. My kitchen would hum with the sounds of pots clanging, timers ticking, mixers whirring. By noon, the house would smell like roasted herbs and cinnamon, every corner heavy with the weight of tradition. But this year, my house was quiet. I woke at 8, stretched my stiff legs, and poured myself a cup of coffee. No turkey in the oven, no counters dusted with flour. Just me, my recliner, and a silence that felt strange but liberating. I let the steam from the mug warm my face as I sat by the window. Outside, the neighborhood bustled. Cars in driveways, families unloading groceries. I imagined the chaos inside Greg and Monica's kitchen and smiled. For the first time in decades, I wasn't the one scrambling. When I finally arrived at their house later that afternoon, I could tell from the driveway that things weren't going smoothly. The front door swung open before I could even knock. Monica stood there, hair frizzing around her face, her apron stained with something orange. "Oh, Ruthanne," she said, breathless. "Thank goodness you're here. Could you—" She stopped herself, her lips twitching. "Never mind. Come in." The smell hit me first. Burnt edges of something sweet, undercooked meat, and the faint tang of panic. I walked into the kitchen, and the scene almost made me laugh. Pots piled on the counters, the oven timer shrieking, Greg waving a meat thermometer like a sword. The turkey sat pale and limp on the counter, juices pooling underneath, nowhere near ready. "Is it done yet?" Greg barked at Monica, who rolled her eyes. "Does it look done, Greg?" she snapped, slamming a pan of half-baked rolls onto the stovetop. For years I had made it look effortless, but here it was, the reality of what it takes to feed 20 people. And watching them struggle was equal parts painful and satisfying. The guests trickled in slowly, coats draped over their arms, eyes scanning the table. My nieces whispered to each other, noses wrinkling at the sight of the uneven dishes. One of my nephews leaned toward me and whispered, "It doesn't smell like your house, Aunt Ruthanne." I only smiled. By the time everyone was seated, the tension was thick enough to slice. The turkey, still undercooked, was paraded out to the table like a fallen soldier. Greg carved into it, and the knife met rubbery flesh. Pink juices dripped onto the platter. A silence fell over the room. Monica cleared her throat. "The sides are ready," she announced too brightly. She gestured toward the mashed potatoes, lumpy and stiff, and the stuffing, soggy in the middle. Guests forced smiles, but the disappointment was palpable. I caught one cousin sneaking a glance at me, as though asking silently, "Where's the meal we're used to?" But I just folded my hands in my lap. For once, I wasn't rushing to fix anything. Greg, ever oblivious, tried to play it off. "See, Mom?" "Not so bad," he said, jabbing a piece of turkey with his fork. "Hosting isn't that hard." I felt the laugh bubble in my chest, but I kept it contained. Instead, I smiled sweetly and took a sip of water. He didn't know it yet, but he'd handed me the perfect opening, because I wasn't just here to eat dinner. I was here to make an announcement that would change everything. Still, I let the meal unravel a bit longer. Guests exchanged awkward glances as they chewed too long on rubbery turkey. My granddaughter Emma quietly pushed food around her plate, her little nose wrinkling. My nieces whispered about missing my pecan pie, their voices carrying just enough for Monica to hear. The room was filled not with the warmth of tradition, but with a brittle discomfort that grew sharper with every bite. And I sat there, calm, serene, almost detached. For once, I wasn't the frantic host scrambling to cover mistakes. I was an observer, and the view was eye-opening. I saw clearly, maybe for the first time, that I hadn't just been keeping tradition alive all these years. I'd been holding this entire family together. Without me, everything frayed at the seams. It was both heartbreaking and liberating. By the time the plates were half full and conversations had stalled, Greg leaned back, smug as ever, and declared, "Well, Mom, I think we managed just fine." That was it, the moment. I set my fork down gently, folded my napkin, and smiled. "Perfect," I said, my voice light but steady, "because I booked a cruise. Next year, you can host your own." The clink of silverware stopped. Greg's fork slipped from his hand and clattered onto the plate. Monica's mouth fell open, her lipstick smudged at the corner. The silence around the table was so complete, I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. But the night wasn't over, because I hadn't yet told them the real announcement, the one that would shake more than just their holiday plans. And when I did, nothing in our family would ever be the same again. The sound of Greg's fork hitting the plate echoed louder than it should have, like a cymbal crash in the middle of a lullaby. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The table froze in a tableau. Forks suspended, mouths half open, eyes darting. It was my turn to savor silence. I sat with my hands folded neatly in my lap, smiling just enough to let them know I wasn't joking. The words still hung in the air like smoke. Perfect, because I booked a cruise. "Next year you can host your own," Monica blinked rapidly, her lipstick-slicked mouth opening and closing like a fish. Her cheeks flushed crimson. Greg leaned forward, his jaw tight, his voice low. "What did you just say, Mom?" I met his stare without flinching. "I said I've booked a cruise. For the holidays, so you'll need to take over. From now on." A ripple of whispers broke out along the table. My nieces exchanged wide-eyed glances. One of my nephews actually grinned, trying to cover it with a cough. Even little Emma sat straighter in her chair, as though she understood the importance of what I'd just done. Monica recovered first, her voice shrill. "You can't just abandon Thanksgiving, Ruthanne. This is your tradition. The family expects..." "The family expects me," I cut in gently, "to work myself to the bone every year. Well, those days are over." Her face hardened. "So you're just going to leave us all without guidance? Without your recipes? Without Without a maid? I asked, tilting my head. The room went still again. Monica's lips pressed together until they thinned into a hard line. Greg shifted in his chair, his voice dropping into that condescending tone he used when he thought I was being emotional. Mom, come on, don't be dramatic. It's just one meal. You've always done it. Why change now? My smile didn't falter. Because, Greg, I don't want to always do it. I've given you 40 years of turkeys and pies and polished silver. If you can't handle one meal without me, maybe you should think about why he scoffed, pushing back his chair. You're making this into something it isn't. This family depends on tradition. Without you hosting, it'll fall apart. Then maybe, I said softly, it should. The words hit him harder than I expected. His eyes widened, his face reddened. You don't mean that, he said through gritted teeth. But I did. I meant every syllable. Across the table, Emma tugged at her mother's sleeve. But Grandma deserves a break, she said in her small voice. She's tired. Bless that child. Her simple honesty landed heavier than all my speeches combined. The chaos began then. Monica snapped at Emma to hush, then turned on me. This isn't just about you, Ruthanne. Holidays are about family, and if you cared about your family, you wouldn't run off to sip cocktails on a cruise while the rest of us are left floundering. I let her words wash over me, calm and steady. If you cared about your family, Monica, you'd have offered to help me years ago. Instead, you only ever handed me lists. A few cousins stifled chuckles. One even clapped a hand over his mouth. Monica's head whipped toward them, her glare sharp enough to cut glass. Greg slammed his palm on the table. Enough! Mom, you're being selfish. What about the kids? They look forward to your food every year. You're ruining everything. I leaned forward slightly, my voice quiet but clear. No, Greg. I've been ruining myself every year, bit by bit, and I won't do it anymore. The weight of my words settled over the table like a heavy quilt. Some nodded in quiet agreement. Others sat stunned. The truth was undeniable. I had carried this family on my back, and they hadn't even seen it. Greg opened his mouth to argue again, but I raised a hand. This isn't up for debate. I've made my choice. I'll be on that cruise. You and Monica can take it from here. The fork that had fallen earlier still lay on his plate, a streak of gravy cutting across the white porcelain. For some reason, that image stayed with me, a symbol of the small collapse that was only just beginning. Dinner limped along after that, though the food tasted even blander under the weight of tension. Conversations turned clipped, forced. Monica tried to redirect attention with polite small talk, but her hands shook each time she refilled someone's glass. I didn't mind the awkwardness. It was cleansing, in a way. A long overdue silence, one that spoke more truth than all the pleasantries in the world. And though the cruise reveal had stunned them, I knew the real announcement, the one that would truly change the course of everything, was still waiting for dessert. As I folded my napkin once more, I felt a calm resolve settle inside me. Tonight wasn't just about shocking them. It was about reclaiming the pieces of myself I had given away too freely, and they hadn't even seen the half of it. Dinner ended in a sputter, not a crescendo. No laughter, no easy chatter, no second rounds of pie. Plates clattered into the sink while Monica muttered under her breath, her face pinched tight. Guests excused themselves quickly, some with polite smiles, others with awkward glances toward me as if they weren't sure whose side they were on. By the time the door shut behind the last cousin, the house was still, heavy with unspoken words. That's when Greg pounced. He cornered me near the kitchen doorway, his voice low and sharp. "What the hell was that, Mom?" I raised an eyebrow. "What was what?" "You humiliated me," he snapped. His arms crossed over his chest, just like he used to when he was a teenager caught breaking curfew. In front of the whole family. Announcing some cruise like you're 17 again and not. He faltered, searching for words. Not 72. The way he said my age, like it was a weapon, made my blood simmer. "I'm well aware of how old I am, Gregory," I said evenly. "And that's exactly why I'm not wasting another holiday breaking my back for people who don't even see me." Monica swept in then, still wearing her stained apron, her eyes sharp as knives. "Do you have any idea how selfish you sounded?" she demanded. "You've built this tradition for decades and now you just throw it away? For what? Sunbathing and fruity drinks?" Her words dripped with disdain, but I refused to let them pierce me. "For peace," I said simply. "For rest. For the joy of knowing I can still live for myself." Monica laughed bitterly. "Rest? You're abandoning your family? Do you have any idea how this looks? Everyone's whispering about how you've given up, about how you don't care anymore." I tilted my head, considering her. Or maybe they're whispering because they're realizing I was the glue all along. And now they're frightened to see what happens without me. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She didn't like hearing the truth spoken out loud. Greg ran a hand through his hair, pacing like a man trapped in his own living room. "This is ridiculous. You're overreacting. It's just one meal. You've always done it, Mom. Why change now?" That was it. The words I'd been waiting for. I stepped forward, cane tapping lightly against the hardwood, and fixed my son with a stare that made him shift uncomfortably. "Because, Greg," I said, my voice quiet but steady, "you've never seen it as just one meal. It's been decades of me carrying every detail, every burden, every dish and decoration. You sit down, you eat, you leave, and you think it magically happens again the next year. It doesn't. I make it happen, and I'm tired." His jaw clenched. He didn't like being reminded of his own entitlement. Monica crossed her arms. "Fine. You don't want to host? Then say so. But booking some crews and announcing it in front of everyone, that was cruel, Ruthanne. You embarrassed us." Her choice of words stung for all the wrong reasons. U.S. Not the family, not the kids. Us. Meaning her and Greg, their pride, their image. That's what they cared about. I let out a slow breath. "I didn't embarrass you, Monica." I revealed the truth. And if the truth makes you uncomfortable, that's not my problem. Her cheeks flamed. She turned away, muttering something about ungrateful. Ungrateful. From the woman who had handed me more shopping lists than thank yous. The irony almost made me laugh. Greg softened his voice then, a tactic he used whenever anger failed him. "Mom, look, I get it. You're tired. But family traditions matter. You're the matriarch. Without you, it all falls apart. Don't you want us to keep coming together?" I studied him. My son, who was no longer a boy, but still behaved like one when it came to responsibility. And I said the words that had been simmering in my chest for years. If the only way this family comes together is by wringing me dry, then maybe it's time it falls apart. His face went pale. For once, he didn't have a quick retort. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, Monica threw her hands up. "Fine, do what you want, but don't expect us to clean up the mess you've made." I smiled softly. "Oh, I don't expect that at all." Because the truth was, my announcement about the cruise was only the first crack in their carefully constructed world. The bigger reveal, the one I'd been holding close to my chest, would shatter it completely. And it wasn't about a holiday. It was about a house. That night, as I slipped into my coat and picked up my purse, Greg called after me. "Mom, think about this." "Please don't do something you'll regret." I turned, meeting his eyes. "The only thing I regret, Greg, is not doing this sooner." Then I opened the door, stepped into the cool November air, and let it close firmly behind me. For the first time in years, I felt lighter, freer, and ready for what came next. Because dessert wasn't just going to be pie, it was going to be the truth. Dessert had always been my favorite part of Thanksgiving, not because of the sweets, though my pecan pie could hush a room faster than any sermon, but because dessert was when the walls came down. Bellies were full, wine had loosened tongues, and conversations flowed easily across the table. But this year, dessert came with tension, baked right in. Monica set out 2 pies, one slightly burnt, the other collapsing at the edges. She tried to smile, but her eyes never stopped darting toward me. Greg poured himself a heavy glass of wine and downed half of it before sitting. My nieces and nephews whispered about how Grandma's pies never fell apart like that, their voices carrying farther than they intended. The table was brittle, like glass stretched thin, waiting for the smallest crack to splinter everything, and I was holding the hammer. I let the fork scrape across plates for a few minutes, the silence heavy. Then I tapped my glass gently with my spoon. The room quieted instantly, all eyes shifting toward me. Old habit. I'd always been the one to give the toast, to say the prayer, to offer the words that pulled everyone together. But this wasn't going to be one of those speeches. I stood slowly, my cane steady in my hand, and looked around the table. At Greg, tense and flushed. At Monica, her smile brittle. At the younger faces, expectant, maybe even curious. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice calm. "I know today has been different." A ripple of nervous chuckles. Someone coughed. "I wanted to share something important with all of you. Something I've been keeping to myself until tonight." I let the pause stretch just long enough to make them lean forward. "I've decided to sell the house." The reaction was immediate. Monica's fork clattered against her plate. Greg shot up in his chair so fast it nearly toppled. A chorus of gasps rippled around the table. "What?" Greg's voice cracked like it hadn't since he was 14. You can't be serious." "I am," I said simply. "The paperwork is already signed." The room erupted. "Signed?" Greg's face turned red. "Without talking to me? Without even talking to you?" I cut in. "Greg, it's my house. I bought it with your father. I paid every mortgage bill, every repair, every tax. What exactly would I need your permission for?" His mouth opened, then shut again. No words forming. Monica was quicker on her feet. "You can't just sell it. Where are you going to live? What about the family gatherings? This is the family home, the anchor, the prison," I interrupted softly. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I've been carrying that house on my shoulders for decades, and lately, all it's been is a weight. Empty rooms, leaking pipes, a yard I can't keep up with, and every time I look at it, all I see is work. Work I'm too tired to keep doing. Greg finally found his voice again, louder this time. "You should have told us. We would have." "You would have what?" I asked, my voice sharpening. "Moved. In? Taken over? Claimed it like you've been hinting for years?" He froze. The truth hit too close. I turned my gaze to Monica. "Don't think I haven't heard your little comments about how, once the house is ours, we'll renovate the kitchen, or how the kids will finally have enough space when we move in. You spoke as though my home was already your inheritance." Monica flushed, her jaw tightening, but she didn't deny it. "I sold it," I continued, my voice steady, "to a young family. A couple with 2 little kids who ran through the yard laughing when they saw it. They looked at that house the way I used to, as a beginning, not a burden, and I decided I'd rather hand it to people who love it than to those who only see it as theirs by entitlement." The words settled like stones in water, sinking deep. Greg's voice cracked with anger. "How could you do this to me?" "To us?" I leaned on my cane, meeting his fury with calm. "I didn't do it to you. I did it for me. For once. But the family will survive without a house that I've been chained to. If you want gatherings, Greg, you're welcome to host them here, or somewhere else. I won't stop you, but I won't sacrifice myself any more for the sake of keeping appearances." The younger ones were quiet, but their eyes told me everything. Some looked shocked, others relieved. Emma, sweet Emma, gave me the smallest smile, a whisper of understanding in a sea of confusion. Monica finally spat out, "This is selfish. After everything we've done for you." I laughed, not cruelly, but with genuine disbelief. "Everything you've done for me? Monica, please, you've done nothing but take. Lists, demands, expectations, but never once a hand offered to help. Don't stand there and call me selfish when you feasted off my labor for decades." The table was silent again, the truth laid bare. I looked around, letting my eyes linger on each face. "I love you all, but I love myself enough now to stop. The house is gone, the cruise is booked, and I'm starting a new chapter. One that doesn't revolve around being the family's servant." I sat back down, my heart steady. Greg's hands trembled on the table. Monica's lips were pressed so tightly they'd turned white. And me? I felt lighter than I had in years, because finally they knew. Finally, they understood that I wasn't theirs to command anymore. And though they looked shocked, angry, even betrayed, I knew, deep down, this was just the beginning. Greg stared at me as though I'd just spoken a foreign language, his face blotchy, his hands gripping the tablecloth so tightly his knuckles whitened. "You can't be serious," he finally managed, his voice trembling. You sold it?" Our house?" "Our house?" I repeated slowly, tasting the words. "That's interesting, Greg. Because last I checked, the deed has my name on it. Not yours, not Monica's. Mine." The silence was sharp. You could almost hear it slicing through the air. Monica broke it first, her voice dripping with indignation. "But we were counting on that house, Ruthanne. We've been planning for years. You knew that. There it was. The truth laid bare without a shred of shame." "Planning," I said, leaning forward, "without ever asking me? Without ever considering what I wanted?" Monica's eyes narrowed. "You're being unfair. We thought—" "No," I interrupted, my voice firm. "You didn't think. You assumed. You assumed that because I've given you everything else, my time, my labor, my holidays, that one day you'd inherit my home as if it were owed to you." Greg slammed his fist lightly against the table, rattling the silverware. "I grew up in that house. It's supposed to stay in the family. It's tradition. You had no right to—" "Tradition," I cut in sharply. "Tradition is me cooking until my hands ache while you sit and watch football. Tradition is me cleaning until midnight while you and Monica take leftovers home in plastic containers. Tradition is me bending over backwards while you barely notice. If that's the tradition you're defending, Greg, then yes." I ended it. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. For once, he had no quick retort. I let the silence sit before I continued. "You think I made this decision overnight? Number. I've been thinking about it for years. Every time I nearly fell carrying a turkey, every time I cried alone in the kitchen after everyone left, every time I heard Monica joke about when the house is ours, I kept count. And eventually, the count added up to one conclusion. I deserve better." I could see the words sink in. Monica shifted uncomfortably, her hands fidgeting with her napkin. Greg's face crumpled in disbelief. "You sold it? Without even telling us?" he said again, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. "Yes," I answered simply, "because if I had told you, you would have tried to stop me." And this decision wasn't up for debate. Monica's composure cracked. "So what? You just handed it over to strangers? People who'll ruin it? People who don't even know the history?" I shook my head slowly. "Not strangers. A young family, a couple with 2 little children who ran through the yard like it was already theirs. They looked at the house with joy, Monica with hope, And I'd rather see it filled with laughter again than hear you call it yours like some prize you've won." Her face twisted. "You're choosing strangers over your own family?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm choosing peace. And you'd know the difference if you'd ever once carried the weight of that house the way I have." Greg buried his face in his hands, muttering, "I can't believe this." "You've ruined everything," I tilted my head. "Ruined what, exactly? Your assumption that you'd live there rent-free someday? That you'd remodel the kitchen without paying a dime? That you'd inherit my sacrifices like they were your birthright? Tell me, Greg, what exactly have I ruined?" His silence was the only answer I needed. The younger ones sat quietly, their eyes darting between us. My nieces exchanged whispers, my nephews leaned back uncomfortably. But Emma, dear Emma, looked at me with something else in her eyes. Admiration, understanding. I gave her the smallest smile, and she smiled back. Monica tried one last time. "Ruthanne, think about this. You'll regret it. You'll be alone. No family home, no gatherings, no legacy to leave behind." I stood slowly, cane steady, voice calm. "My legacy isn't 4 walls and a roof. My legacy is the years I spent raising a son, loving a family, giving more of myself than I ever should have. And now my legacy will be something else. The choice to finally live for myself." Her lips parted, but no words came. Greg finally looked up, his eyes rimmed red, his anger giving way to desperation. "What happens now, Mom? Where will you go? What are we supposed to do?" I placed a hand on his shoulder, not unkindly. "What you should have been doing all along. Taking responsibility for yourselves. Hosting your own holidays. Building your own traditions. And maybe, just maybe, learning what it feels like to appreciate someone before it's too late." I sat back down, the weight of decades lifting from my chest. They thought the cruise was the big announcement. They thought I was selfish for leaving a single holiday behind. But now they knew. I wasn't just leaving Thanksgiving. I was leaving the life they had boxed me into. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The room felt different after my words. Not just tense, but fractured. Like a vase dropped on the floor, not yet swept up. The cracks ran everywhere, through every face at the table. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then my niece Sarah, bless her brave heart, cleared her throat. "Aunt Ruthanne," she said softly, "I think what you're doing is inspiring. Honestly. You've given so much to this family. If anyone deserves to do something for herself, it's you." Her mother, my sister's daughter, Paula, gave her a sharp look. "Sarah, don't encourage this nonsense. Family homes are supposed to stay in the family. That's what keeps us together." "Together?" Sarah shot back, her cheeks flushed. "Grandma's been killing herself every year to keep us together, and none of us have lifted a finger. That's not together. That's taking advantage." The room buzzed with whispers, half nodding, half frowning. My nephew James spoke next, his voice hesitant. "I mean, I get what you're saying, Aunt Ruthanne, but isn't this kind of drastic? Selling the house without telling anyone?" I turned to him, meeting, his eyes steadily. "Drastic, James. Would have been dropping dead over a stove one Thanksgiving while you all filled your plates. This is me saving myself before that happens." He shifted uncomfortably, unable to argue. Monica, of course, seized the opening. "See? Everyone thinks it's too much. You've gone too far, Ruthanne. It's selfish. It's reckless." "Selfish?" Sarah interrupted, her voice rising. "You're the one who's selfish, Monica. Every year you handed her lists like she was your personal chef. Don't act shocked now that she's finally standing up for herself." Gasps rippled. Monica's eyes widened in fury. She opened her mouth, but for once, she didn't have the quick upper hand. Greg leaned forward, glaring at Sarah. "You don't understand. This house was supposed to be ours. Mom knew that. She's throwing away our family legacy. That word again. Legacy. I straightened, my cane resting against my chair. Greg, a legacy isn't a building. A legacy is how you treat people. And what this family has shown me, what you have shown me, is that you value my work more than you value me. His face twisted, but he didn't speak. Across the table, my cousin Margaret, never shy with her opinions, scoffed. Honestly, Ruthanne, I think it's cruel. What will holidays even look like now? You're tearing apart everything we've built, everything I built, I corrected gently, with my hands, my back, my time. You all enjoyed it, yes, but none of you built it. You just showed up, a few nodded reluctantly. Others shifted, refusing to meet my gaze. Emma, sweet Emma, spoke then. Her little voice carried more power than all the arguments before it. I think Grandma's brave. She always makes things nice for us, and if she's tired, she should rest. That's what we learned in school. To help people when they're tired. We didn't help her. The silence that followed was heavier than any adult's words could have been. Monica tried to brush it off with a laugh. Oh, honey, it's not the same. But Emma cut her off with the blunt honesty only children have. It is the same. And for once, Monica had no answer. The table had split now, clear as day. On one side, the murmurs of support, nieces, cousins, even a nephew or two who finally admitted they'd never realized how much I carried. On the other, the whispers of disapproval, mutters of betrayal, complaints about tradition and family duty. But I sat in the middle, calm, unshaken. Because I hadn't spoken for approval. I'd spoken for freedom. Greg pushed back his chair, the legs scraping hard against the floor. This isn't over, Mom, he said, his voice tight. You can't just sell our childhood out from under us. I met his eyes. I already did. His face went pale, the fight draining from him. Monica stood beside him, her arms crossed, her expression like stone. Together, they looked less like a couple in control and more like two children denied their candy. As coffee was poured and plates cleared, the air stayed thick with division. Some hugged me as they left, whispering words of support. Others left stiffly, their eyes avoiding mine, as though I'd betrayed them personally. But when the last guest stepped out into the cold night, I felt lighter. Not guilty, not ashamed, just lighter. Because the truth was, families don't fall apart over houses. They fall apart over entitlement, over the belief that one person should bear the weight of everyone else's comfort, and I was done carrying it. Later that night, as I slipped into bed, I thought about the cruise, about the ocean stretching wide and endless, about mornings that would begin with nothing more than coffee and sea air. But more than that, I thought about the empty house I'd left behind, the house that would soon be filled with laughter again. Not mine, not Greg's, but a new family's. A family who saw it as a gift, not a given. And I smiled, because maybe that was the truest legacy I could leave behind. The morning of my cruise arrived cold and gray, the kind of November chill that seeps into your bones. Normally, I'd have been elbow deep in stuffing by then, worrying about oven timers and seating charts. Instead, I stood in my bedroom, zipping up a suitcase that felt lighter than it should have, considering how much it carried. A wide-brimmed sun hat sat on top, resting like a crown. Next to it, a floral bag stuffed with miniature toiletries, a new pair of sandals, and a novel I hadn't yet opened. Not a carving knife, not an apron, not a single roasting pan. For once, the weight I carried wasn't measured in turkeys or pies. It was measured in possibility. When the cab pulled up to the curb, I hesitated for a moment at the front door, glancing back into the empty house. The walls seemed to sigh, bare and waiting. Soon another family would fill them with their laughter, their arguments, their stories. My time with them was over. I touched the doorframe gently, almost like a goodbye, then squared my shoulders and stepped into the brisk morning air. The cab driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, loaded my suitcase into the trunk. "Holiday trip?" he asked, pulling away from the curb. "Yes," I said, the word tasting sweet. A holiday for me. The drive to the port felt like a transition, each mile peeling away another layer of obligation. By the time the ship came into view, massive white gleaming against the gray sky, I felt like a different woman. I'd seen cruise ships on television, but standing before one was something else entirely. It loomed like a floating city, promising escape, adventure, and something I hadn't let myself dream of in years: rest. As I walked up the gangway, cane in hand, a breeze lifted the brim of my hat. My heart thudded with something I recognized from long ago: anticipation. My cabin was modest, but to me it felt like a palace: a small bed, a window that framed nothing but endless ocean, and drawers waiting to be filled with things meant only for me. I unpacked, slowly, deliberately, savoring each item I placed. Later, I stood on the balcony as the ship's horn blared. The deck vibrated beneath my feet, and slowly the shoreline began to shrink. I thought of Greg then, probably sitting stiffly at his own dining table, struggling to manage a Thanksgiving meal without my guiding hand. I pictured Monica pacing, snapping at him, snapping at the kids, trying to hold together an evening she'd never appreciated until now. For years I had worried about leaving them behind, and here I was watching the coastline fade into the horizon, realizing they were the ones who had left me behind long ago. The first evening, I ate dinner at a table for two, alone, but not lonely. A waiter with a bright smile poured me a glass of wine. I ordered salmon, something I rarely made at home because Greg never liked fish. Funny how so much of my cooking had revolved around other people's preferences. The salmon was perfect, tender, buttery, with a squeeze of lemon that made my lips tingle. I savored every bite, and when dessert came, I chose creme brulee. No one sighed about calories. No one demanded pecan pie. Just me, my spoon, and the crack of caramel beneath it. And for the first time in decades, I didn't eat standing in a kitchen. I ate seated, relaxed, unhurried. The days melted together after that. Morning coffee on the balcony, watching the ocean glitter like a jewel. Afternoon walks on deck, the sun warming my shoulders. Conversations with strangers who asked about me, not about what I could cook or clean or organize. There was a retired teacher from Ohio who told me about her garden, a widower from Maine who loved to dance, a pair of sisters celebrating their 70th birthdays together, laughing louder than anyone else at the pool. I wasn't just a mother or a grandmother or a hostess. I was simply Ruthanne, and that was enough. One evening, as the sun sank into the water like a coin dropping into velvet, I leaned against the railing, tears stinging my eyes, not from sadness, from release, from realizing how much of myself I had locked away, convinced that duty was all I had left to give. The ocean stretched infinite before me, and for once I felt infinite too. By the time the ship pulled into its first port, I knew something had shifted permanently. I hadn't just left behind a holiday or a house. I had left behind a version of myself that lived only for others. And though my family might still be reeling, still whispering, still angry, I knew one thing for certain. I could never go back to who I had been before. Because once you've tasted freedom, you can't untaste it. When I stepped off the ship a week later, my cheeks were sun-kissed, my suitcase a little heavier with trinkets, and my heart lighter than it had been in years. I had walked beaches, tasted food I'd never tried, and laughed with strangers who knew nothing of my history, who saw me simply as Ruthanne. As the cab wound me back toward home, I braced myself for the cold November air, but even the bite of the wind couldn't take away the warmth I carried inside. The first thing I noticed when I returned wasn't the empty house I was packing up. It was the silence from Greg and Monica. No calls, no messages, just a void. I knew them well enough to recognize that silence. It was the sound of wounded pride. The phone rang 3 days later. It was my niece Sarah, her voice bubbling with barely contained laughter. "Aunt Ruthanne, you should have seen it," she said. "Greg tried to host another dinner. Monica insisted she could handle it all." I leaned back in my chair, smiling. "And how did that go?" Sarah giggled. "The turkey was raw in the middle again. The mashed potatoes turned out like glue. Half the guests left early. Oh, and Monica forgot to buy whipped cream, so she tried to pass off store-bought pudding cups as dessert. I couldn't help it. I laughed. A deep belly laugh I hadn't felt in years. "Pudding cups?" "Yes," Sarah squeaked, laughing with me. "Everyone whispered about how different it was without you." But you know what? I told them. I told them they had no right to complain when none of them ever offered to help you, and some of them actually admitted I was right. Her words wrapped around me like a quilt. At least someone had finally said it aloud beyond my own lips. The next call came from James, the nephew who had been hesitant that night. His voice was quieter, more thoughtful. "Aunt Ruthanne, I've been thinking. You did the right thing. We never realized how much you did for us until it was gone. It wasn't fair." "Thank you, James," I said softly. "That means more than you know." There was a pause. Then he added, "Greg's furious, though. He says you betrayed him, that you ruined Thanksgiving forever." I chuckled. If one woman's absence can ruin a holiday, then maybe it wasn't much of a holiday to begin with. Of course, Greg eventually called too. It was late one evening, his voice sharp even through the static. "Are you happy, Mom?" "Everyone's talking. They say you've gone senile. They say you're destroying the family for selfish reasons." I listened calmly, then asked, "And what do you say, Greg?" He hesitated, just long enough to tell me the truth he didn't want to admit. He was hurt. Not by the sale of the house or the cruise, but by the fact that for once he wasn't in control of me. "I say," he muttered, "that you've changed. And I don't like it?" I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Good. I didn't change for you to like it. I changed for me." The line went silent, then clicked off. The whispers continued, of course. Some cousins muttered about the end of tradition. Others avoided me altogether, as though standing too close to my independence might make them question their own lives. But then there were the quiet smiles from those who understood, who pulled me aside to say they admired my courage, and the younger ones, oh, how they surprised me. Emma sent me a drawing in the mail, a picture of me on a big ship with the words, "Grandma's happy now." I framed it and placed it on my dresser. Sarah started calling more often, asking me about my travel plans, about what I wanted to do next. Even James began to visit, carrying groceries, insisting on cooking dinner, just this once. It wasn't perfect. His pasta sauce nearly set off the smoke alarm, but the effort mattered more than perfection ever did. Meanwhile, Greg and Monica floundered. They tried to host Christmas. From what I heard, it was a disaster. Burned ham, kids bored and restless, guests leaving early again. People compared it to my old dinners, and the contrast wasn't kind. But I didn't gloat. Not really. Because deep down, I knew the point wasn't to prove I was better at hosting. The point was to prove that I wasn't required to, that they could survive, or fail, on their own. And judging by the awkward calls, the gossip, the quiet apologies from some corners, the lesson was sinking in. One evening, as I sat with a cup of tea by my window, I thought about everything that had happened. They had called me selfish, dramatic, even cruel. But all I had done was tell the truth, that I was tired, that I deserved rest, that a house and a holiday didn't define me. I defined myself. And if that truth made them uncomfortable, maybe it was a discomfort they needed, because sometimes families need to be shaken before they remember what really matters. The house was gone. The cruise had come and gone, but the freedom I felt, that remained. And I knew this was only the beginning. I sometimes sit by the window now, tea warming my hands, and wonder why it took me so long, Why I gave so many years to silence, to duty, to a tradition that drained me instead of filled me? The answer is simple: love. I love my family so much that I believe sacrifice was the same thing as love. That if I just gave more, if I worked harder, if I carried the weight without complaint, they would feel cared for. And they did. But they mistook my sacrifice for obligation. They thought it was endless. But I am not endless, and neither are you. That Thanksgiving was the first time in decades that I chose myself, not in anger, not in spite, but in the quiet recognition that I mattered too. My house, my traditions, my time, they weren't obligations, they were gifts. And gifts, by nature, can be given or withheld. Greg and Monica still bristle when they see me. They avoid certain topics, speak in clipped tones, drop little barbs about family falling apart. But I don't rise to them anymore, because the truth is, family doesn't fall apart when one woman steps back. It only reveals what was already cracked. And the younger ones, Emma, Sarah, even James, they remind me that maybe, just maybe, I didn't ruin anything. Maybe I opened a door for something new. A tradition not built on one tired woman's back, but on shared effort, mutual respect, and love that doesn't demand servitude. So here's what I'll tell you, dear listener. Don't wait. Don't wait until your knees give out, until your hands can't hold a spoon, until your silence becomes resentment so thick it poisons even the good memories. Don't wait for permission. Because if you're waiting for your family to hand you freedom, you'll wait your whole life. Take it. Claim it. Because your worth isn't measured in turkeys roasted or tables set. It isn't in clean floors, polished silver, or how many pies you bake in a season. Your worth is in you, in your laughter, in your peace, in the dreams you still hold, no matter your age. I was 72 when I finally chose myself, and I wish I had done it sooner. So I'll ask you now, the same way I asked at the beginning, where are you watching from? And more than that, what are you carrying that isn't yours anymore? What traditions, what expectations, what burdens have been placed on your shoulders so long that people don't even see you under them? Tell me. Because your story matters. And maybe, just maybe, saying it aloud is the first step to setting yourself free. As for me, I'll keep booking cruises. I'll keep drinking my tea slowly, not gulping it between oven timers. I'll keep filling my life with the things I once thought were out of reach. And when the whispers come about selfishness, about tradition, about how I've changed, I'll smile. Because they're right. I have changed. And I will never go back.